Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I was feeling optimistic about my love life for the first time in years when I matched with Trevor on the dating app. After my last relationship ended painfully, I had taken a long break from dating to focus on myself. But now that I was ready to put myself back out there, Trevor seemed like the perfect guy to go on a first date with. We had really hit it off chatting online over the past few weeks. He was handsome, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We shared similar senses of humor and bonded over our love of old movies and hiking. When he suggested meeting up for drinks, followed by dinner at the new steakhouse in town, I readily accepted. The day of the date, I took extra care getting ready, curling my hair, and choosing a flattering wrap dress that I felt confident in. I don't know why, but I was nervous in a way I hadn't been for a first date in years. I tried to shake it off, blaming the jitters on being out of practice with dating. This was just two adults getting to know each other over a nice meal. Surely nothing could go too horribly wrong. Trevor had suggested meeting at Murphy's Tavern for a pre-dinner drink. I arrived right on time and immediately spotted him waving me over. He looked just as attractive as his photos, if not more so in person. We exchanged slightly awkward hellos and settled into our bar stools, launching into the usual first date chit-chat. Trevor was just as charming as he had been over text. The conversation flowed easily and I found myself really enjoying his company. I was so caught up in our lively discussion that I hardly noticed the time passing. Before I knew it, Trevor was checking his watch and noting that our dinner reservation was in 10 minutes. We finished the last sips of our cocktails and gathered our things to head next door to the restaurant. As we walked out of the bar, Trevor casually suggested bringing my drink along with me. In the moment, I didn't think much of it and mindlessly followed him out, cocktail glass still in hand. But when the hostess stopped me at the entrance of the steakhouse, politely informing me that outside beverages were prohibited, I was mortified. How could I not have realized that was a bad idea? Flustered, I turned around to find somewhere to ditch the drink, but Trevor had already sauntered in ahead of me, leaving me standing there awkwardly alone. Thanks a lot, I thought, scrambling to explain myself to the bartender and check the drink with him. By the time I made my way back to the restaurant entrance and was shown to our table, Trevor was deep in conversation with our waitress. He gave me a cursory introduction before continuing to regale her with some story about his recent golfing victory. I tried to join the conversation, but he seemed more interested in holding her attention. I probably would have been more annoyed if I wasn't so distracted by the sight of my ex-mark seated just one table away with a gorgeous brunette. We briefly made the most awkward eye contact before mutually shifting our gazes. I couldn't believe this was happening. My night was quickly going off the rails. In an attempt to regain some sense of normalcy, I tried to engage Trevor again now that the waitress had left. But he seemed intent on bragging about himself, rambling on about his fancy car and golf club membership. I plastered on a polite smile and nodded along, but inside I was screaming. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of me trying to subtly avoid eye contact with Mark, dodge Trevor's flirtation with the waitress, and feign interest in Trevor's self-centered monologues. I poked at my now unappetizing steak, willing this date from hell to end. Finally, after we had cleared our plates, the waitress returned to ask about dessert. Before I could decline, Trevor enthusiastically said we needed to see a menu. I stifled an eye roll and waited impatiently for the bill. Just when I thought this night couldn't get any worse, Trevor cleared his throat after the waitress walked away and said he had something to tell me. I braced myself, unsure what bombshell he was about to drop next. Turns out, Trevor revealed he's actually married with kids. He joined the dating app on a whim just to test the waters and see what was out there. I sat there, stunned, as he prattled on about how special I was and how he wanted to keep seeing me on the side. He grasped my hand, insisting his wife never had to know. That was the final straw. I yanked my hand back, threw some cash on the table, and got out of there as fast as I could. I heard Trevor calling after me, but I did not look back. The details of my escape are hazy. I have no recollection of getting home or even what mode of transportation I took. but I do remember scrubbing myself raw in the shower that night, trying to wash away the residue of that terrible date. In the sober light of day, I was left wondering how I could have been so utterly wrong about Trevor. All the signs of a disastrous first date were there from the start, but I had optimistically ignored them. Part of me wondered if I somehow manifested this nightmare with my worries about getting back out there, or if maybe the universe was protecting me from getting involved with a lying cheater. Regardless, it was unequivocally the worst first date of my life. It made for quite a story to share with friends over wine and laughs later on. But in the moment, as I lived through the horror unfolding, there was nothing funny about it. I learned my lesson from now on. I'll make sure to really take the time to get to know someone before leaping into a first date. No more blind optimism, no matter how charming they may seem over text. I'll be bringing my own drink wherever I go, that's for sure. The memory of that uncomfortable first date still makes me cringe when it pops into my head, even over a year later. I had been so hopeful at the start of the night, thinking I was finally ready to get back out there after taking a few months off from dating to heal from a bad breakup. My friend Julia had convinced me to try out this popular new dating app, saying it was time to get back on the horse and start meeting new people. After chatting with a few decent guys, I really hit it off with Dylan, and we made plans to meet up that Saturday night at a trendy wine bar downtown. I had to spend an embarrassing amount of time getting ready beforehand. I felt those familiar first date jitters, the butterflies in my stomach as I did my hair and makeup just right, the slight panic wondering if I had picked the right outfit, the practicing in the mirror of witty conversational tidbits so there would be no awkward silences later. I was nervous, but also genuinely excited to meet Dylan in person. Our messaging conversations on the app had flowed so easily. He seemed intelligent, asking me thoughtful questions about my job, family, and interests, while also making clever jokes that actually made me laugh out loud. I remember showing my roommate a particularly funny meme he had sent me about overly competitive trivia night teams. "Okay, this guy seems pretty hilarious and self-aware," she had said. "I have a good feeling about him." When I arrived at the bar and saw Dylan waiting there, tall and just as handsome as his photos, I felt a wave of relief. So far, so good. He greeted me with a warm smile and polite hug. We sat down at a table, ordered drinks, and the conversation began smoothly. We covered the basics, where we were from, what we did for work, our favorite sports teams, etc., but then there was a lull after we got through the small talk. I asked Dylan a question about an international trip he had mentioned taking last year. "I don't really feel like talking," he replied after a pause. "I just want to look at you." I nervously laughed, assuming he must be joking. But Dylan's expression remained serious as he proceeded to stare directly at me from across the table, barely glancing at the drink menu or touching his wine once it arrived. I tried to fill the increasingly awkward silences by asking more questions. About his job, his friends, places he had traveled, books he liked to read, anything to get an actual conversation going. But his responses were frustratingly brief before he went back to intently gazing at me without saying a word. I could feel myself getting more and more uncomfortable under this unrelenting stare down. I didn't know what to say or where to look. Should I call him out for his weird behavior, make an excuse to leave early, try to power through the rest of the date? I shifted in my seat, took larger gulps of wine for liquid courage, and anxiously fidgeted with my napkin. Meanwhile, Dylan remained eerily silent and focused. His eyes kept tracing over my face and body slowly, as if he was a sculptor examining a statue from every angle. I started to feel like some kind of object on display rather than a participant in a date. It felt like time had slowed to a crawl. After what must have been at least a half hour of this unbearable, one-sided staring, Dylan finally spoke up to say he was going to the restroom. As soon as he was out of sight, I frantically waved over our waiter and asked for the check. I didn't care if it was rude. I needed to get out of there immediately. Who knew what would happen if I stayed and let this train wreck drag on even longer into the night? Would he insist we go back to one of our places afterwards? I shuddered thinking about being alone with him. Just as the waiter brought the check, I saw Dylan headed back from the restroom. My heart sank. I threw some cash on the table and hurriedly grabbed my purse, calling out, "I'm so sorry, I'm suddenly not feeling well at all. I think I should head home early." I weaved through the crowd and out the exit before Dylan could even sit back down, not looking back. Finally, outside in the cool night air, I took a deep breath. My skin was still crawling from being under Dylan's microscope for so long. What kind of man barely speaks for over 30 minutes of a first date, and instead just examines his date like a science experiment? As I drove home, replaying the bizarre encounter in my mind, my relief at escaping was mixed with unease about what could have happened if I had stayed. I felt unsettled knowing there were men like Dylan out there trying to objectify women under the guise of a typical first date. After that unsettling experience, I took a break from dating for a few months. I needed time to rebuild my confidence after putting myself out there again had gone so horribly wrong. Eventually, I did get back on the dating scene, but I was much more cautious. I made sure to really get to know someone online before meeting up, and always drove myself on first dates in case I needed a quick exit. Thankfully, my next first date was wonderful, and nothing like that cringeworthy night with Dylan. But I'll never forget that feeling of being stared at relentlessly by a near-silent stranger. It taught me to trust my instincts and stay alert on dates with someone new. All's well that ends well, but some memories stick with you as cautionary tales. I was pretty excited when Jane agreed to go out with me. We had met at a mutual friend's party the previous weekend and really hit it off. She was cute, funny, and seemed normal enough during our brief conversation. I got her number and texted her a few days later asking if she'd like to grab dinner that Friday. To my surprise and delight, she said yes. Little did I know then what I was getting myself into. When Friday evening rolled around, I took extra care getting ready. I shaved, styled my hair, and put on a nice button-down shirt. I wanted to make a good impression for our first date. I drove to Jane's place right on time and texted her that I was outside. A minute later, she came bounding out of the house and hopped in my car with a bubbly greeting. Things were off to a great start. We chatted casually as I started driving us to the restaurant I had picked out. A few minutes into the drive, Jane spoke up asking if we could make a quick stop at her mom's place first because she needed to run in and grab something real fast. I didn't think much of the request at the time and obligingly said yes, assuring her the slight detour didn't bother me. Jane directed me to a small, run-down house on a side street. She gave me an appreciative smile, saying again that this would just take a second, and she promised it would be quick. I nodded and pulled up in front of the house. Jane hopped out, assuring me once more she'd be right back. I settled in to wait, scrolling idly through my phone. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I was starting to wonder what was taking so long. Just as I was about to text Jane to check on her, the front door of the house flew open. Jane came rushing out, nearly tripping down the front steps. She was clutching a baby carrier in her hands. An older woman who I assumed was her mother followed right on her heels, visibly yelling loudly and trying to grab Jane's arm. Jane managed to evade her mom's grasp and made a beeline for my car. She wrenched open the passenger door and practically threw the baby carrier onto the back seat. That's when I realized there was actually a baby inside it, now wailing. Jane jumped into the front seat beside me, urgently directing me to go and drive away quickly. Her mom had reached the car and was pounding on the window, still shouting. Jane scrabbled to buckle her seatbelt, continuing to gesture for me to hit the gas and get us out of there. I froze, overwhelmed by the nightmarish scene unfolding around me. Jane kept motioning for me to drive while struggling to restrain her mom from reaching into the car. The baby was crying even louder now. My mind raced, but I couldn't get my body to react. After a few more seconds of panic, I simply turned the ignition off and pulled the keys from the slot. Jane whipped her head toward me, visibly angry, but her mom looked relieved. She came around to my side of the car, opened the door, and retrieved the baby carrier from the back seat. It wasn't long before police sirens could be heard approaching. Jane's mom must have called them as soon as she realized what was happening. 2 officers questioned the 3 of us extensively to get statements. From what I could gather, Jane had lost custody of her child due to drug issues. She was only allowed supervised visits. Instead, she had concocted a plan to use me in my car to try and make off with the baby. I felt sick realizing Jane had taken advantage of my willingness to make the stop. I was an unknowing accomplice in her attempted kidnapping. After what felt like forever, the police finally left. I was in a daze as I drove home, replaying the entire scene over and over again in my head. Jane's wild desperation, her mom's anger and fear, the baby, an innocent pawn in its mother's scheme. What if I had just driven away when Jane told me to? Could she have succeeded if I wasn't there to stop her? The thought made my stomach turn. I decided then and there I was sticking to group dates and meeting in public places from now on. No more picking up virtual strangers at their home. I deleted Jane's number, wanting no further contact. In the following days, the experience continued to haunt me. I felt guilty about my role as the getaway driver, however accidental it was. I kept imagining how much worse things could have gone, but I also felt relieved that I stayed calm enough not to drive off, and that the police arrived to handle the situation. Who knows what kind of deeper mess I could have found myself in if I had fled the scene with Jane and the baby. I consider myself lucky that Jane revealed her true colors on the very first date before I got any more involved with her, and that despite the initial shock, I didn't make any rash decisions in the heat of the moment that I later regret. It was certainly a wake-up call about being more cautious when meeting people from online or through apps. You never truly know someone until you spend time together in person. In the end, while it was a traumatic experience, at least no real harm was done. The baby was safely returned to its grandmother within minutes. The police resolved the situation without things turning more dangerous. I escaped from my brief role with just a crazy story to tell. But it could have gone so much worse. Other first date horror stories have had much darker endings. So I suppose I got off easy, all things considered. Just another cautionary tale about trusting strangers before really getting to know them. I'm keeping all first dates simple and in public now. No more agreeing to potentially risky detours or stops at someone's home. This experience taught me to follow my instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore red flags just to be polite. So it was certainly a nightmarish first date that left me rattled. In the end, the only real damage was to my Navy, but now I know better for the future. And I've got one heck of a story to share. All's well that ends well, I guess, though I'm still sticking to coffee dates for the foreseeable future just to be safe. I have been harboring a crush on my coworker, Natalie, for months. We both work at a busy advertising agency downtown, often working late nights together on big campaigns. I was immediately drawn to Natalie when she started working there with her lively personality and cute pixie haircut. We hit it off right away, spending breaks chatting in the office kitchen. The more I got to know Natalie, the more Nan Rev became. She was wit-smart with a sarcastic sense of humor I found endearing. I loved making her laugh by teasing her about her obsession with reality TV or by bringing up funny work gossip. I finally worked up the courage to ask Natalie out on a proper date after months of casual flirting. My heart raced as I pulled her aside one Friday and asked if she'd like to get dinner that weekend. She smiled, her blue eyes twinkling, and said she'd love to. I was over the moon. I spent the next few days obsessing over where to take her and what to wear. I settled on a trendy Italian restaurant downtown that wasn't too stuffy but still romantic. When Saturday arrived, I showed up to the restaurant early, nervously checking my outfit in a window reflection. I had chosen a navy blazer and button-down shirt, hoping I looked put together but not over the top. I kept glancing around, waiting for Natalie to arrive. When she walked in wearing a striking red dress, I was practically speechless. She looked absolutely radiant, her short brown hair perfectly framing her face. I fumbled over my words greeting her, blown away by how beautiful she looked. The hostess led us to a cozy table by the window, where I graciously pulled out Natalie's chair for her. Over wine and pasta, the conversation flowed easily. We laughed about funny work situations and bonded over a shared love of travel. I was captivated by Natalie's smile, finding myself getting lost in her eyes. Under the glow of the candlelight, I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. This woman was stunning, inside and out. As the meal went on, Natalie rested her hand on mine a few times, making my heart race. I was falling for this girl hard. After dinner, I impulsively asked Natalie if she wanted to come back to my place for a nightcap. I was shocked when she said yes. We picked up some gelato on the drive back to my apartment. Walking up to my door, Natalie teased me about the chocolate gelato being a romantic touch. I jokingly took a bow, thrilled that the date was going so well. We got cozy on the couch with our gelato, as I put on a Spotify playlist of Natalie's favorite indie bands. Sitting close to her, I was overwhelmed by the urge to kiss those perfect lips. Just as I was working up the courage to make a move, we heard my front door unlock. To my horror, my roommate Mark walked in, back early from his camping trip. Natalie leaped off the couch, startled. I felt my face flush red with embarrassment. Mark gave me a knowing look, clearly surprised to see me with a date. I made awkward introductions, wanting to disappear. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Mark excused himself to his bedroom as I walked naily out. She avoided making eye contact, clearly mortified by the situation. I apologized profusely, blaming my forgetful roommate for the interruption. Naily just nodded, saying she should get going. My heart sank as I watched her hurry to her car. The next week at work was agonizing. Naily avoided me in the office, ducking into conference rooms when she saw me coming. At the morning meeting, I snuck glances at her while our manager droned on about upcoming deadlines. Naily kept her gaze fixed on the table, her cheeks flushed. My heart ached realizing our budding relationship was likely ruined. After a few weeks of unbearable awkwardness, I requested a transfer to another department. It was too painful to work near Naily after our disastrous date. On my last day before changing roles, Naily stopped by my desk. She apologized for the uncomfortable situation and said she valued me as a friend. I thanked her, blinking back tears, and wished her well. Our bittersweet goodbye felt final. That failed date taught me an important lesson about expectations. I'd built up an imaginary romance with Natalie in my head, ignoring any signs she just wanted to be friends. Under the spell of my crush, I projected my own wishes onto her behavior. I wanted our connection to be something more, so I ignored the reality of the situation. My fantasy blinded me to the fact that Natalie likely just saw me as a fun coworker, nothing more. Looking back, it's clear I let my emotions override logic. I was so enamored by Natalie that I saw what I wanted to see. But the heart-wrenching embarrassment of that experience helped me grow. Now I know to keep my feelings in check when getting to know someone new. While rejection stung, I emerged wiser. I won't let infatuation cloud my judgment moving forward when dating. Though Natalie and I never recovered our friendship, she'll always be the one who got away. My first real love, even if unrequited. I had been chatting with Stefan online for a few weeks and was really starting to like him. He seemed intelligent, thoughtful, and we just clicked right away. I was thrilled when he finally asked me out on a proper first date to dinner and a movie. I spent that entire week beforehand obsessing over what to wear, changing my outfit 20 times a day of. I was so nervous but also giddy with excitement. I hadn't been on a real date in months, and Stefan was the most promising guy I'd met in a long time. When I walked into the restaurant and spotted Stefan already seated, my stomach did a little flip. He stood up to greet me with a warm hug that lingered just slightly. I couldn't help but notice how handsome he was in person, with piercing blue eyes and a smile that made me weak. He complimented my floral sundress and jean jacket, which made me blush. I had agonized over that outfit for far too long, but now I knew I had chosen well. We settled into easy conversation over dinner. The initial first date awkwardness quickly faded as we discovered shared interests in classic films, hiking, and our mutual love of animals. I found myself opening up more than expected about my hopes for the future and dreams of one day living on a ranch. Stefan listened intently, asking thoughtful follow-up questions and making witty jokes that kept me laughing all through dinner. I was really starting to let my guard down. It seemed like we were establishing a genuine connection. When the check came, Stefan insisted on paying over my protests. He said he was happy to treat me and led me gentlemanly out of the restaurant with his hand hovering near the small of my back. It gave me a thrill when he took my arm as we walked to the nearby theater. This was already going so much better than my last string of lackluster Tinder dates. Stefan bought our movie tickets and a large popcorn to share despite my offer to pay for myself. Always a gentleman, he let me choose our seats and I picked a spot near the back row. As the lights dimmed and the preview started, I became hyper-aware of his proximity. About halfway through the film, Stefan casually stretched and draped his arm around my shoulders. I tensed up at first, but eventually settled into it, allowing myself to relax against him. This was all part of a normal, promising first date after all. No need to be so guarded. Maybe 10 minutes later, I felt a slight tugging sensation on my long hair. Assuming Stefan was absent-mindedly playing with it, I didn't think much of it at first. But the tugging gradually intensified, and I felt an odd, repeated pulling. Before I could gently brush him off, an unmistakably warm, wet sensation crept over my scalp. Stefan was chewing my hair. I sat frozen in confused disgust for a moment, hesitant to believe what was happening. But when I reached back to push his hand away, my hair was indeed soaked with saliva. Stefan persisted, even leaning in closer to breathe down my neck. Repulsed, I shoved his arm off me, but I was trapped in the confined space of the theater seats. Terrified and shrinking down in my seat, I felt helpless as Stefan continued gnawing aggressively at my hair, oblivious or indifferent to my obvious distress. I pushed against the armrest, desperate to escape this nightmare I found myself in. But there was nowhere to go. Stefan kept at it relentlessly, slobbering and tugging at my hair with his teeth. I was powerless to stop him. Linking back tears, I endured the rest of the movie pinned against the armrest, cringing away from Stefan's unwanted advances. He was emboldened now, forcefully yanking my hair whenever I tried to evade his mouth. I could feel his hot saliva dripping down my neck as he slurped and chewed mouthfuls of my hair. It was a living hell with no end in sight. When the credits finally rolled, I leaped from my seat and rushed for the exit. I heard Stefan calling after me in feigned confusion, but I didn't dare look back. My hands shook as I scrambled to unlock my car and peeled out of the parking lot, checking the mirrors repeatedly to ensure he wasn't following. The entire drive home I sobbed, feeling violated and disgusted. I kept replaying those traumatic moments in my mind, Stefan's unwanted touch and breath on my skin. I wished I had screamed or fought back. Instead, I just sat there, stunned and helpless. Once home, I locked the door and scrubbed my hair in the shower for nearly an hour, trying in vain to erase the sticky feeling of his saliva. Needless to say, I immediately blocked Stefan and never spoke to him again after that disturbing experience. It completely shattered my trust. I became much more cautious and worried when meeting someone new after that. It took a very long time to feel comfortable dating again following the trauma of that twisted first date. I consider myself lucky that I escaped unharmed, but the vivid memory of Stefan's perverse assault in that dark theater still haunts me. I will never understand what would possess someone to do something so depraved and frightening. Some scars simply do not fade, no matter how much time passes. I'm just thankful I listened to my instincts and got out of there before things escalated even further. I had been feeling discouraged after a string of lackluster dates from dating apps recently, so I was cautiously optimistic when I matched with Simon on Bumble last month. His profile seemed genuine, mentioning his job as an accountant and love hiking on the weekends. We exchanged messages over the app for about 2 weeks before he finally asked if I'd like to meet up for dinner downtown. I hesitated at first, my confidence shaken after so many dead-end dates. But Simon's thoughtful communication style and interest in my day-to-day life eventually won me over. I decided to take a chance, thinking maybe this time would be different. We had plans to meet at a trendy new restaurant I'd been wanting to try on Saturday evening. I spent all day Saturday getting ready, taking extra care with my hair and makeup. I decided on a floral sundress and tan wedges that I thought looked both cute and casual. I even dug out a pair of dangly earrings I hadn't worn in ages. I felt that familiar flutter of excitement and nerves that comes with meeting someone new. I left my apartment early, knowing my chronic lateness was likely to make me late otherwise. Luckily, the restaurant was only a 15-minute drive away. As I pulled into the parking lot right on time, I immediately spotted Simon waiting outside the front entrance, just like we had planned. He looked exactly like his photos, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and olive skin. When he saw me get out of my car, his face broke into a warm smile. We exchanged slightly awkward hello hugs before he commended on my dress, and I returned the compliment about his jacket. Simon had parked just across the lot, so we made our way over to his shiny black sedan. I noticed how clean it was inside as he opened the passenger door for me. Not a speck of dust or clutter in sight. As he started the car and pulled out of the lot, he asked about my day and if I had any trouble finding the restaurant. I rambled on about my chaotic morning at work while he nodded along politely. When I made a self-deprecating joke about my terrible sense of direction, he laughed on cue. Trying to keep the conversation flowing, I asked Simon about his accounting job, if he had any fun weekend plans coming up. But his responses seemed oddly terse compared to our earlier messages, and he kept glancing out at the rearview mirror. His fingers tapped rapidly on the steering wheel, even as I prattled on about my hobbies and friends. An uneasy feeling started creeping in that I tried my best to ignore. Just as I was about to ask if he was all right, flashing blue and red lights appeared behind us. Simon hastily steered the car to the shoulder and put it in park, his shoulders visibly tensed. A stern-looking officer approached and requested Simon's license and registration in an authoritative tone. I watched in confusion as Simon shakily complied before being asked to step out of the vehicle. My sense of unease exploded into sheer panic as the officer questioned Simon just outside my open door. Simon's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with what looked like fear. After a few agonizing minutes, the officer came over to my side and asked me to step out as well. I could feel my hands trembling as I unbuckled my seatbelt and made my way to the rear of the car on unsteady legs. The officer informed me in a serious tone that he had just discovered a sizable brick of cocaine during a search of the trunk. I stood there in stunned disbelief as he described the large quantity and street value of the narcotics. There was no way this could be real. It felt like the world was collapsing around me. Desperately, I tried to explain that there had to be some mistake. I had only just met Simon and knew nothing about any drugs. The officer eyed me with suspicion, clearly not convinced. Terrified of being arrested, I begged him to believe me, feeling on the verge of tears. Just then, Simon spoke up to corroborate my story, that we had just met tonight for our first date. The officer continued questioning us separately for what felt like an eternity. But finally, he seemed to accept that I was an unwitting passenger unaware of the hidden drugs. After a stern warning to be more careful in the future, the officer let me return to my car. I walked back in a daze, my mind spinning. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. I kept replaying the traumatic events over and over, but I was no closer to making sense of any of it. In the weeks since, I've agonized over what could have led Simon to have a brick of cocaine in his trunk when we met. Was he involved in dealing drugs or some kind of criminal activity? What would have happened if the officer hadn't believed I didn't know anything? I'm still shaken when I think about how close I came to potentially being arrested that night. My friends have all said how crazy and scary the situation sounds. I know I'm incredibly lucky to have avoided something far worse. I've learned the hard way to be much more cautious when meeting someone from a dating app for the first time. I don't think I'll be taking a risk like that again anytime soon. The experience has definitely destroyed my trust. I'll need to really get to know someone before considering even a first date in the future. I should have known from the very first message that something was not right. When I initially matched with Aiden on the dating app, I was cautiously optimistic. Their profile seemed normal, some smiling photos, a witty bio, common interests like hiking and live music. Nothing stood out as peculiar. We exchanged messages over the next few weeks. Aiden was flirtatious yet respectful, asking thoughtful questions about my job, family, and hobbies. I opened up about my passion for photography, my close relationship with my siblings, my dreams of traveling the world one day. Looking back now, I realize Aiden was meticulously gathering intel to construct an image of me in her mind. But at the time, I thought we were building a meaningful connection. I felt comfortable and at ease. So when Aiden finally asked me out on a proper first date, I happily accepted. We made plans to meet that Friday evening at a small cafe downtown. I took extra time getting ready, curling my hair, and putting on a new dress. Despite some initial first date nerves, I felt optimistic as I drove downtown and parked near the cafe. I immediately spotted Aiden waiting inside, sitting at a table peering out the window. They broke into a wide smile and stood up when I walked in, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "It's so nice to finally meet you," Aiden exclaimed as they ushered me to sit down. A waitress came by and took our orders, an iced tea for me and a black coffee for Aiden. I noted how they precisely rattled off their intricate coffee order, while I simply asked for the house tea. We then settled into an easy conversation that felt like picking up right where our messaging left off. Aiden steered the discussion, asking about my family and friends, my job as a photographer, my morning routine. They listened with focused intensity, nodding along and interjecting thoughtful follow-up questions. I happily chatted away, touched by their genuine interest. After finishing our drinks, Aiden suggested we take a walk through a nearby park. "It's such a nice night, and there's a great trail around the lake that I think you'd really enjoy," they said. I agreed, despite the fact that I had worn heels not well suited for nature trails. Aiden assured me it was an easy, paved path all the way around. As we meandered through the park, Aiden continued peppering me with questions and observations. They pointed out the flower varieties, the species of ducks, even the unique rock formations around the lake. I was impressed by their knowledge until a creeping realization set in. Aiden's intricate familiarity with this park was unusual. When I questioned how they knew so much about the area, they smiled and responded simply, "I come here a lot." A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off, not wanting to assume the worst. We continued walking and talking as dusk fell and shadows enveloped the tree-lined trail. When Aiden gently took my hand in theirs, I tensed up but said nothing. I quickened my pace and pulled my hand away when they stopped to caress my back. They did not seem bothered by my subtle clues to stop. By the time we looped back to the front of the cafe, I was on high alert. Aiden turned to me and said eerily, I feel like I already know you so well, like we're old friends. I know your family, your job, your favorite things. It's like I know you better than anyone." I stared back, unsettled. Aiden's tone was sweet yet unhinged. I needed to get out of there. I made an excuse about needing to get home to feed my cat. Aiden just smiled and said, "Of course I understand. Let's do this again soon, okay? I can't wait to get to know you even better." I forced a smile and turned towards my car. As I walked away, I felt Aiden's eyes following me. I resisted the urge to break into a panicked run, keeping my pace even until I was around the corner. Only then did I break into a sprint, fumbling to unlock my car with shaky hands. I stood out of the parking lot, checking the mirrors repeatedly to ensure I wasn't followed. When I arrived home, I locked the door behind me and sank down against it. My heart was racing as I replayed the night's events. Aiden's detailed knowledge of the park, the probing personal questions, the subtle unwanted touching, and the final chilling remarks. It all indicated a deeply unsettling obsession. I spent that night wide awake, paralyzed by the thought that Aiden had been stalking me for who knows how long. They had constructed a meticulous profile of me without my knowledge or consent. I felt violated and unsafe. The next day, I contacted the police to report what happened. They documented my statement and said they would investigate, but I could tell they did not consider it a high priority. I have not heard from or seen Aiden since that night, but I remain constantly vigilant. I take different routes home from work, park in well-lit areas, and keep pepper spray on my keys. I stopped using all dating apps and become extremely cautious when interacting with new people. This experience shook me to my core and destroyed my trust. I hope my story serves as a warning to others to follow their instincts and exercise extreme caution when meeting someone new. Monsters often disguise themselves in sheep's clothing, as I learned in the most terrifying way possible. I'm grateful I escaped relatively unscathed, but I will never let my guard down again. The risk is simply too great. I still can't believe I let my buddy Dave talk me into trying out that new dating app. I'm just not good at meeting people online. I like to see you when talking to face, But he said I needed to get back out there after my last relationship ended 6 months ago. He went on and on about how dating apps are the best way to meet people these days. Just to get him off my back, I finally caved and downloaded the stupid app he recommended. I spent about an hour trying to come up with the perfect pics to use. I don't take many selfies, so it was hard finding shots of me looking halfway decent. I finally settled on a couple photos of me out hiking last summer, one with a big smile on my face and the other of me standing proudly at the summit. For my bio, I just wrote that I enjoy being outdoors, going to sports games, and hanging out with friends. The next day, I was so surprised to see I already had some matches and messages. One was from a really cute blonde named Tara. Her photo showed her dressed up nice, like she had just come from a fancy dinner. She said she was a nurse and loved helping others. We started messaging back and forth. She seemed sweet and down to earth, even asking more about me and my interests rather than just flirting. After a couple weeks of chatting, I worked up the courage to ask Tara out on an actual date. I couldn't believe it when she wrote back immediately saying yes. She suggested a cab downtown that Saturday afternoon. I was over the moon. I was finally going on a date with this girl I'd been talking to for weeks. I got to the cafe 20 minutes early and grabbed a table by the window so I could watch for Tara. I sipped an iced coffee and checked my phone constantly, even though I was early. Finally, about 5 minutes before we were supposed to meet, I saw a cute blonde girl heading for the cafe entrance. My heart did a little leap. She looked just like Tara's photos. But when she got closer, my stomach sank. This girl was at least twice as big as the petite girl I'd seen in Tara's pictures. I tried to hide my shock as the girl came over and said Matthew with a smile. I faked a smile back and said yes. We awkwardly shook hands and she sat down across from me. I didn't know what to think. Was this even the same Tara I've been talking to? She made some joke about the barista getting her name wrong on her coffee cup. Her voice sounded the same as the voice messages we'd exchanged. But the woman sitting across from me looked so different than the woman in the photos. I sipped my coffee, trying to figure out what to say. Should I confront her about the misleading pictures? Make an excuse to leave? I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I also felt totally blindsided. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes, not making eye contact. Finally, she mumbled something about how her pictures were a little old. A little old? There's no way these were recent pictures of her. I felt hurt that she had so blatantly lied to me about her appearance. But I also didn't want the date to be a total bust. Maybe if we got talking, I'd see past the dishonesty and we'd hit it off. I tried to keep an open mind and asked her questions about nursing school and her job at the hospital. Her face lit up talking about helping patients. She seemed sweet, even if she had lied online. The conversation started flowing better. We were laughing and learning little details about each other's lives. Against my better judgment, I was starting to think maybe this date could be salvaged. But about halfway through our coffees, I started feeling really strange. At first, I thought I was just jittery from the caffeine and nerves. But then I noticed my vision starting to blur at the edges. I blinked hard, trying to clear it. But that just made the whole room start spinning. I had to grip the table to keep from sliding out of my chair. Tara asked if I was okay. I tried to respond, but my tongue felt thick and numb. Was I having some kind of allergic reaction? My mind started racing, putting together the pieces. Tara's misleading photos, how comfortable she seemed in this cafe she chose, the fact that she went to get our drinks while I saved our table. Had she slipped something in my coffee? I lurched up from my chair, the whole room tilting around me. I choked out something about needing the bathroom and stumbled away from the table. In the bathroom, I collapsed on the floor in front of the toilet as a wave of nausea. I threw up violently. Between heaves, I gasped for breath. This wasn't just food poisoning or a bad reaction. She must have drugged me. I had to get out of there. I used the sink to drag myself up to my feet. I splashed water on my face, which helped a tiny bit. I still felt woozy and disoriented, but the urgency of the situation pushed me to move. I made my way back into the cafe, clinging to chairs and tables for support. Our table was empty. She had fled. I was furious. This whole date was clearly just a scam to rob me. I threw some money down and lurched outside to the street. The sunlight and noise overwhelmed my senses. I spotted Tara half a block away, speed walking away from me. Rage coursed through me. I tried to call out to her, to demand she stop, but my voice came out weak and garbled. My legs buckled under me. I reached for my phone to call for help, but my coordination was shot. My phone clattered to the sidewalk. Pedestrians streamed past me, oblivious. The drug was hitting me hard now. Everything was blurring into streaks of color. I stumbled down the street, trying to focus on Tara's retreating figure, but I could barely stand upright. I managed to stagger down the block after her before collapsing near an alleyway. Shadows closed in around me. I desperately tried to cling to consciousness, but it was no use. Against my will, my eyes slipped shut. I have no idea how much time passed before I woke up. It was nighttime when I came to. I was still slumped on the cold concrete in that alley. My head pounded. I patted my pockets. As expected, my wallet, phone, and watch were gone. That kidnapping Tara had clearly rifled through my pockets while I was out cold. Shakily, I stood up, leaning against the alley wall for balance. I still felt disoriented and weak as I made my way back to the sidewalk. The first person I saw was a concerned police officer who hurried over to help me. I spilled out the whole horrific tale, from meeting Tara online to her drugging and robbing me. The cop listened closely but said there was little chance of tracking her down with the few details I could provide.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.